Thomas Hobbes, the man who made the monster. In 1651, a book was published that changed philosophy forever. Its title, Leviathan. Its author, a man who understood our nature so well he gave us nightmares. That's right. Today we're going to look at the mind behind the monster. A quote to start with: "If there is no power to control men, then we will live as predators upon each other." Now let's meet our philosopher. Thomas Hobbes was born in 1588, as I said, a time of war and also the year of the Spanish Armada invading England. He once said, "I was born a twin of fear." Let me tell you why. Hobbes was a British philosopher who believed humans are driven by three things: fear, desire, and self-preservation. To him, chaos lies within each one of us. It's what makes us who we are. And without laws or absolute power to control us, we'll destroy each other. His most brutal and famous phrase, "Man is a wolf to man." This isn't about evil for evil's sake. It's about the animal instinct for survival that lives in us all. We're capable of great things, sure, but also of terrible things. The only thing that stops us from doing those terrible things is fear. Not morality, not kindness, fear. Hobbes said if we lived in a world with no laws, no government, no power to control us, then we would be in a constant state of war. A war where anything goes, where might is right, where the strong preys on the weak. That's his famous quote. Man is a wolf to man. Now, before you dismiss him as some crazy, pessimistic old dude, consider this. He's not saying we're wolves because we want to be. He's saying we're wolves because deep down we know we have the capacity to tear each other apart. And that knowledge creates fear. The only thing that stops us from attacking each other, from killing each other, is that same fear. Fear of what? Of being attacked ourselves, of losing our heads over some land dispute, of losing our heads over some ideological difference. Fear is what stops us from killing each other. Imagine you and your neighbor have an ideological difference. You both believe different things. You both believe strongly. But normally, you keep it to yourselves, don't you? Why? Because your neighbor might not agree, might get angry, might come over and attack you. You fear his response. You fear his anger. You fear his strength. So you keep your mouth shut. That's what Hobbes meant when he said we live in a constant state of war, a war not of weapons and open conflict, but of silence and fear. You avoid war with your neighbor, not because you don't want to fight, but because you fear the consequences. Not because you're moral, but because you're afraid. And the moment that fear disappears, the moment you feel powerful enough to defend yourselves, the moment you feel like you can take someone else on, the moment you stop fearing each other, that's when Hobbes says we'll enter a true state of war. A war that won't end until one of two things happens. Either we destroy each other completely and leave this world a burnt-out shell of what it once was, or we create a Leviathan. The Leviathan is a metaphor for a powerful central authority that keeps us under control, that stops us from tearing each other apart. Hobbes didn't say which way it would go. Maybe we'd destroy ourselves, maybe we'd create a controlling authority. Either way, he said, without laws and without a controlling power, we'll enter a true state of war, a war that won't end until one of those two things happens. But we're not in a state of war, are we? You and I, right now, watching this video, we're not at war. You don't wake up every morning fearing for your life. You don't look at your neighbor and plan his murder. You don't look at your neighbor at all. In fact, you probably like him. Hobbes was wrong, right? Well, maybe. Maybe he was just describing Europe. See, Hobbes lived through the 30 Years' War. That's one of the longest and deadliest conflicts in European history. No wonder he was so pessimistic. He lived in a world of violence, of religious fervor, of hatred, of war. We live in a world that seems to have moved past all that, or have we? Are we still in a state of war? Are we still ruled by fear? Do we still live in a constant state of potential violence? Or have we overcome our animal instincts? Do we not attack each other because we're moral? Because we've evolved past our bestial selves? Because we're not animals anymore? Or do we not attack each other because we still live in fear? Think about it. If we stopped fearing each other, if we stopped fearing our neighbors, if we really stopped fearing each other, then according to Hobbes, we'd enter a true state of war. We'd be at each other's throats. So here's the question. Are we still ruled by fear? Are we still motivated by fear? Do we still live in a state of war, a state of silent, smoldering, underlying war? And if so, then maybe, just maybe, Thomas Hobbes was right. What's the worst that could happen? That's what we're going to find out in this video. So imagine a world with no police, no government, no rules. Just do whatever you want. What would stop someone from stealing your stuff or killing you or dominating you? Well, according to Thomas Hobbes, that world actually does exist. It's called the state of nature. The war of all against all, total chaos, life at its rawest and most dangerous. Let's imagine it. You wake up in the morning, it's a beautiful day, you're hungry. You go outside to hunt for food. There's this delicious apple on a tree. You reach for it. Another guy reaches for it too. You both want the apple. You fight over it. He takes the apple and runs away. You chase after him. You wrestle for the apple. Finally, he stabs you with a pointy stick. You're scared. You run home. A big group of guys chase after you because they also want your stuff. You barricade yourself in your house, but they break down the door. You have no other choice. You join the group. Now there's safety in numbers, right? But wait. Now you're part of a group that takes what it wants from whom it wants. And if someone doesn't give it up, you will take it by force. This is the world of the war of all against all. It's every man for himself, and life is nasty, brutish, and short. That's what Hobbes argued in his masterpiece, Leviathan. Published in 1651, it was one of the earliest and most influential treatises on political philosophy. So how did Hobbes come up with such a bleak prognosis for humanity? Well, his answer was simple. Human beings are naturally selfish and self-interested. We're rational, yes, but our rationality is limited. We don't always act in accordance with what's best for us in the long run. Sometimes we just do what we want in the moment. And we're also emotional creatures, easily provoked to anger, jealousy, fear. And our emotions drive us to do irrational things. We act out of self-interest and our passions. The result? A world in chaos. Hobbes' state of nature isn't some idyllic, uncorrupted paradise lost. It's a hellish nightmare from which we need to escape. And the only way we can escape it is by creating a powerful, centralized authority. In a state of nature, there are no laws or courts or police to protect us. So individuals are free to do whatever they want, but they can't really be free because they're constantly at risk of being killed or subjugated by others. They live in constant fear. And that's not what Hobbes meant by free. True freedom, he argued, can only exist where there is security. But in the state of nature, there is no security. All there is the danger of being killed or enslaved. So no one can really be free in that situation. We must give up our natural freedom in order to gain security. And that's why Hobbes proposed what he called a social contract. We voluntarily give over certain freedoms to a sovereign power in exchange for protection. We create a Leviathan, a sea monster that keeps us safe by imposing law and order. The alternative, the war of all against all, is even worse. So we agree to be ruled over, not just by any sovereign, but by the most powerful sovereign imaginable, an absolute monarch with complete authority over his subjects. Better that one person has all the power than that everyone has the freedom to do whatever they want. At least then there will be order. Of course, there is a problem with that theory. Absolute authoritarian states don't really promote human flourishing. People living under the constant threat of a tyrannical government aren't exactly free. You might think Hobbes was wrong. You might say the state of nature he imagined is not realistic. After all, humans aren't like wolves. We're more complex than that. But maybe he was onto something with his depiction of our selfish and irrational nature. After all, the 20th century has been the bloodiest in human history. 2 world wars, genocides, terrorism, torture, the threat of nuclear annihilation. Hobbes thought we were naturally selfish and emotional, and he was probably right. We need rules, laws, a government to keep us in check. Without them, we're like a bunch of angry mobs chasing each other through the streets. But here's the question. What kind of government should we have? Hobbes wanted an absolute monarchy. What do you think? Should we give all the power to a central authority? Does that promote human flourishing? Or does it just lead to tyranny? Or is there some middle ground? If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, please subscribe. A long time ago in a world far, far away, or maybe just down the street, People were brutes. They lived in constant fear of death and violence. They had no jobs, no schools, no hospitals. They were free. They were free to do whatever they wanted, but they couldn't do anything. Fear kept them in a perpetual state of conflict. Then one day something miraculous happened. The people agreed to stop being brutes. They agreed to give up some of their freedom in exchange for protection. They agreed to follow a ruler, to obey laws, to live in a society. They entered into a social contract. Now let's get back to the present. What was that story about? It was about the social contract, an agreement between the people and the ruler, a pact that says we will give you our obedience if you give us security. But why would people agree to such a thing? Why would they give up their freedom? Because freedom without security isn't really freedom at all. It's like having a car without any roads. You can go anywhere. Yeah, nowhere. That's why most of us prefer security to freedom. We're not really free to choose. We choose security because that's what everyone else is doing. And we don't want to be different. We're not really free to choose. We choose security. But how does the social contract work? How does it stay in place? Well, for that we need a sovereign, someone or some institution with near absolute power, a ruler who can't be challenged without bringing the whole thing crashing down, a ruler who inspires fear. Fear is the engine of obedience, says Hobbes. It pulls us away from violence and barbarism. It makes us keep our word and honor our agreements. It's what prevents us from beating each other to death over who gets to use the color purple on Mondays. It's what allows us to sit together on a bus or in a classroom or in a restaurant and not blow each other's brains out. Fear is the great equalizer, the ultimate persuader. Hobbes believed that we're all motivated by fear, even our best impulses, our desire to be good, to help others, to contribute to society. All of that stems from our fear of punishment. If we do bad things, we'll feel bad, which is what keeps us from doing bad things in the first place. So if fear is the engine of obedience, then the ruler has to be the one who owns the biggest engine. The ruler must inspire the greatest fear. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart. And what happens when it falls apart? Well, then we're back to being brutes, which is not a pretty picture, hence the appeal of the social contract. But there's another reason why the social contract works. It's not just fear, it's also self-interest. Let's face it, we're all in this together. We all need roads and schools and hospitals. We all need security and stability. So it makes sense to cooperate, to follow rules, to pay taxes. It benefits everyone. It's the rational thing to do. And we know that deep down. We know that we're better off obeying the ruler than challenging him. We don't want to live in a world where everyone does their own thing because we all have something to lose. We have property, jobs, families, reputations. And we know that if we challenge the ruler and he loses power, those things won't be safe. So we stick with the program. We play by the rules. We pay our taxes. For Hobbes, fear and self-interest are the two key ingredients of the social contract. Without fear, there'd be chaos. Without self-interest, there'd be no cooperation. Together, they make the social contract work. Was Hobbes a pessimist? Well, he didn't believe in utopias, so I guess you could say that. He saw the world as it is, not as we wish it would be. He knew that man wasn't naturally good. He knew that we're all selfish and irrational and driven by fear, but he also knew that we're capable of greatness, of creating laws and institutions that allow us to live together in relative peace. He believed that we could be good, not in a utopian sense, but in a controlled sense, that we could be kept in check by fear and self-interest. So next time you find yourself wondering why you pay taxes or why you don't beat up your neighbor, remember the social contract. It might not be a very inspiring thought, but it's a realistic one. And realism, as Hobbes knew, is the first step towards wisdom. Thanks for watching. Do you feel like the world is falling apart? Well, today, over 350 years ago, Thomas Hobbes published a book called Leviathan, and in it, he described a world descending into chaos, a world without laws, without security, without a single moral code. And reading his description of that chaotic world, I couldn't help but think, well, actually that sounds pretty familiar. So in this video, we're going to ask, what does Hobbes teach us about life in the modern age? What does he have to say about our political leaders who seem determined to drag us all into a war that nobody wanted? And what can we learn from his famous idea of the social contract? Thomas Hobbes was born in 1588, which means that when he wrote Leviathan in 1651, he was writing from experience. He'd lived through the English Civil War, a period of extreme violence and upheaval. And the world he was writing about was one that descended into chaos after the death of a monarch. Now in this video, we won't be getting into Hobbes's theory of the state of nature, the idea that humans are only ever free by accident, not by design. We won't get into his idea of the social contract either, the idea that we voluntarily give up some of our freedom in exchange for protection. Instead, I want to focus on what he had to say about how we escape the chaos of the state of nature, the state of war. For Hobbes, the answer was simple. Build a Leviathan. Now, if you don't know your biblical stories, the Leviathan was a sea monster, a whale or serpent-like creature that swallowed whole any sailors unfortunate enough to cross its path. But in order to slay this beast, the people had to work together and form a pact, an agreement to submit themselves to a single sovereign power, a power that would become the Leviathan. But what did that sovereign power look like? Well, today the world remains marked by wars, by hatred, by instability, and the Leviathan still exists. The state, the laws, the security systems that monitor us, that watch over us, that keep chaos contained. They are the Leviathan. But what if the Leviathan becomes the monster itself? What if the state turns against the people, becomes oppressive, abusive, overly controlling? Well, according to Hobbes, even then a monster with laws is better than a world where everyone is their own judge. In other words, even under an unjust ruler, it's still better to be ruled by a single sovereign power than to descend into chaos. And that might sound crazy, right? We live in an age where we celebrate individual freedom, the right to speak our minds, the right to make our own decisions. But Hobbes is telling us that those freedoms are only possible under the protection of a sovereign, a protector that stands between us and chaos. But there's a second lesson to learn from the Leviathan. You see, Hobbes was a materialist. That means he believed that everything in the universe is made of matter and energy. There is no supernatural, no God. And so the source of our goodness, according to him, comes from within. Yes, we have natural rights, he says, but we also have natural fears and self-interest. And these two things, our fear and our interest, drive us to make a deal to escape the chaos, yes, but also a deal to keep ourselves safe. And this brings us to the scariest truth Hobbes uncovers. The scariest truth? Chaos isn't out there. It's within. And the Leviathan that saves us from it also watches us. The monster that protects us is also the monster that judges us. And that's why, according to Hobbes, we must never abandon the social contract, never turn away from the state, no matter how unjust it seems. Because to do so is to turn away from the only thing that keeps us safe, to turn away from the only thing that stops us from becoming the monsters that lurk within. So as Hobbes warned over 350 years ago, don't run from the monster. The monster, it's you. You ever wonder why we don't live in a world without war, hatred, and instability? Why is it always the same shit, different day? Well, Thomas Hobbes has an answer for us. And to answer, we have to go back to the beginning, all the way back to 1651 in his book, The Leviathan. Now, back then, Europe was a mess. Famine, plague, and civil war. So Hobbes wrote this, The Leviathan, to say, hey, look, let's put this all behind us. Let's just agree to be ruled by a strong, oppressive state so we can finally have some peace. That was his argument. And he said, sure, this state might not be perfect. It might be abusive, controlling, but it's better than the alternative, which is no state at all, which is what he called the war of all against all. And today, look around you. You could be forgiven for thinking Hobbes was right, that the war of all against all is still out there, that the only thing containing it is the Leviathan, the state, the laws, the security systems, all the things that keep us from killing each other. But here's the question. What if the Leviathan is the monster? What if the state, the laws, the security systems become the war of all against all? What if they're the chaos we're trying to escape? Well, to Hobbes, even then, even when the Leviathan becomes the monster, it's still better than the alternative. It's still better than letting everyone be their own judge of right and wrong. In other words, Hobbes would say, hey, at least under an oppressive state, there's still some order. At least there are still laws, some rules that keep the peace. Sure, it sucks that the state might be abusive, controlling, but it's better than letting everyone be their own judge because then, quote, there would be no way to escape such a judgment but death. Which brings us to the most terrifying truth of Hobbes's philosophy, that the monster still lives, that the war of all against all isn't out there in some far-off place. It's inside us. It's in our nature. And the Leviathan that saves us from it, the state, the laws, the security systems, they also watch us, control us because they know us better than we know ourselves. We may think we've tamed the monster, but as Hobbes wrote, the monster is you. Okay, thanks, bye.